Inheriting Dad's House, Losing Mom's Love, How I Uncovered Her True Motive, and Inheriting Dad's House, Losing Mom's Love, How I Uncovered Her True Motive and Built a Life Beyond the Betrayal when Dad passed away and left me his house. Mom left me. I overheard her telling her husband that she was only doing it to get money from her parents, but she later made an effort to set things right. Just a few months before my 18th birthday at the age of 17, my life took an unexpected and excruciatingly. My father died. He experienced a heart. He was there with us, vibrant 1 minute, and then he was gone. On the speed at which everything changed is still difficult for me to comprehend. No warnings were given, no time to prepare ourselves emotionally or say our goodbyes. The most an important person in my life was my dad. Abruptly taken from me, we had a very strong connection. I looked to him for guidance, solace, and amusement. It was like losing a piece of my soul when I lost him. My dad's lawyer brought the family together to make his will public after his funeral while we were still in the cloud of mourning. Although my dad wasn't particularly affluent, he had worked hard throughout his life and had made wise investments. The lawyer revealed, much to everyone's surprise, that he had essentially left everything to me. He owned the family home, but it was now in my name. I had the deeds to the house signed by him. I didn't first completely understand the significance of that, especially when I was still grieving his passing. My mother was enraged while I was still absorbing it. She began screaming as soon as she learned that the house was now legally mine, and she adamantly asked that the lawyer show her the will so she could confirm it. To put things in perspective, my parents' marriage was among the worst in history. My parents were always at odds, and it wasn't like one of them was at fault because they were both flawed. They had first married for love, or at least that was how they explained it, but any love they had soon vanished as their disagreements widened. Their love gave way to frustration and resentment. My parents were both very focused on their careers. That really made them farther distant from one another, despite your assumption that it would bring them closer together. My dad's achievement was too much for my mom to handle. This was because she lost out on years of her work when she decided to have a child. My dad never made her make this decision, to be clear. My mother has expressed to me on multiple occasions her uncertainty about having children. She ultimately made the decision to become pregnant nevertheless, since she didn't want to look back and regret not having children, but she soon discovered how much she detested it after having me. My mother is a prime illustration of why not every should be permitted to have children. She would become upset with me for the tiniest things, like not tying my shoes properly or having trouble with my homework, and I can still clearly remember those times. In the beginning she treated me like a burden. Even if I couldn't really comprehend it as a child, I could sense her contempt. I would witness other children with their mothers receiving warm support and hugs. She only gave me coldness and criticism. My mother treated me badly. Because she was frustrated with her own life, I couldn't help but feel like I was in the way. Due to health problems and pregnancy complications, my mom had to take a few years off from her job after giving birth to me. She blamed me for her inability to work, which she detested. My dad was the one providing for the family. At this period he believed that this would be the ideal chance for my mother to connect with me, but it never did. My mother chose to remain emotionally aloof throughout this time rather than attempting to connect with me. She would frequently tell my dad and me that she wished I had never been born because she wasn't suited to be a mother. As a result, my dad would to divorce her. Throughout a number of arguments with her, my mother would to take me away from him as a form of punishment for him abandoning her rather than taking her to see a psychiatrist. My mother was obviously unhappy with the way things had gone both in her marriage and as a mother. My mom frequently left me alone without any concern or attention by zoning out for hours watching TV at home or going out with her friends. She made no attempt to hire a babysitter. I was left to my own devices most of the time. During her few visits she made it apparent that she had no interest in taking on the beauties of a typical mother. I don't recall her ever preparing a decent meal for me because she detested cooking. Pizza rolls, mac and cheese and other frozen foods that didn't require work made up the majority of my diet. That was all I knew for a long time. Since I was too little to understand any better, I didn't mind at the time, but now I see how neglected I was. It was more than just missing home-cooked meals or a good hug. The most painful part was the emotional abandonment. I immediately discovered that I should never complain to my mother about anything. Every time I attempted to communicate my wants or sentiments, it would backfire. She would reprimand me and act as though I was solely to blame, never accepting responsibility or making an effort to make things right. I found it easier to suppress my emotions and keep her from getting upset. I was always trying to avoid upsetting her, always trying to blend in and always walking on eggshells. I was deeply scarred by the reality I had to live with. Unlike my mother, I felt appreciated and seen by my father. He was undoubtedly the best of the two, but I wouldn't say he was the ideal parent. He had his shortcomings too. He really liked hanging out with me, unlike my mom. He never gave me the impression that he was acting out of duty. It made all the difference because he truly cared about being in my life. As I began to mature, our home underwent a transformation. In the end, my mother returned to work, although she never fully reclaimed the esteemed position she had held before to her leave. She detested having to rebuild her career after feeling that she had already paid her dues and had to start over. It wasn't any easier to be the target of her hatred, even though I could somewhat understand her frustration. Losing years of professional advancement and feeling stuck in her situation, I ended myself spending a lot of time alone myself. After my mom started working again, I would get home from school, prepare a basic lunch and complete my assignments. It became a habit, and to be honest, by then I was accustomed to getting by on my own. I had essentially come to realize that I couldn't count on my mother to provide me with much emotional or physical support. For my parents still tried, though my dad and I would go out to supper together on some evenings. My mother never came, as though she were an outsider in her own family. She maintained a distance from them. My dad and I would discuss everything and everything at those dinners. I would tell him everything about my school life, my friends, or whatever was on my mind, and he would tell me about his job. Occasionally the fascinating projects he was working on or office drama. Everything seemed regular during those few hours. It was one of the few times I didn't feel like an afterthought or a burden, but rather like a daughter enjoying time with her father. I truly treasure those times because they made me feel safe and connected. My mom started a new job that needed her to travel frequently. When I turned 14, I believe she saw the high-paying job as an opportunity to finally regain some of the professional success she had lost. She chose to take the job without consulting my dad, which resulted in one of the most heated arguments I've ever seen between them. Although my dad didn't mind her working, she would be gone for days at a time for this job, which meant he would have to care for me by himself. Their voices reverberated throughout the home as I listened to them quarrel late into the night. I was the primary point of disagreement. I detested being the cause of so many of their arguments. I went to my dad's study later and assured him that I could take care of myself while he was at work, and that he didn't have to worry about me. I reasoned that perhaps my parents' relationship would improve if I could only demonstrate that I wasn't a burden. I recall the expression on his face when I said that guilt swept over him, as though he recognized that I had been made to mature more quickly than I should. He had drawn me into an embrace. It was one of those times when we both recognized the true dysfunction of the situation without explicitly stating it. My mom started her new job shortly after, and she started to go missing for days at a time. The home was quieter, almost tranquil without her. It wasn't much better when she returned either. When she did speak to me, it was like she was speaking to a complete stranger warmly, and a sense of belonging was lacking. She would return home fatigued, giving me a fleeting glance, and then either go back out with her friends or go into her room. Despite the fact that we were in the same room, she felt very far away. I had learned not to expect much from her by then, but it still hurt my parents. Marriage was essentially non-existent by the time I was 16, as though they were just housemates. They were sleeping in separate bedrooms. If you're wondering why they didn't simply file for divorce and move on, trust me, I asked myself that question often. In actuality, I believe that they both chose not to get a divorce because it was simpler to continue living in this unhealthy, distant relationship than to deal with the financial and legal complexities of separation when it comes to alimony, legal bills, and arguing over child custody. Things that neither of them seemed to want to deal with. Divorces may be extremely expensive. My schooling was the only significant investment that my parents truly shared. Despite the fact that they both made good money, they hardly spent any money on me other than the home expenditures. They didn't have much money to divide because my dad owned the house. They didn't have to quarrel over little matters. They lived under the same roof but had largely independent lives, each with their own food and car. For my part, I would receive money from my dad each week, which would be plenty to pay for groceries and school lunches. I didn't really anticipate much more, and while it wasn't much, it was sufficient for me to handle. I had gotten used to being in the background while they were preoccupied with their own problems and grievances. As I approached my 17th birthday, I made the decision to celebrate my birthday in a way that was authentic for once. My birthday had always been somewhat of a non-event until that point, unless I reminded him. My dad, bless him, had a tendency to forget my birthday. He would try his best to get me a cake once I did, and we would either have a low-key dinner or celebrate in private at home. However, it was never more than the two of us. I wanted something bigger this time. I wanted to have a true party and invite my friends over. To my surprise, my father concurred. He helped me organize it and thought it was a terrific idea. Naturally, my mother declined to go. She simply stated that she didn't want to be part without even bothering to offer an explanation. I honestly didn't give a. I had been emotionally and physically accustomed to her absence by that time, so I wasn't bothered by the idea that she wouldn't be present. I finally received what I wanted for the first time in my life, a birthday celebration filled with joy, laughing, and friends. It was ideal for me, but it wasn't ostentatious for a second. I was truly joyful. I had finally come to terms with the fact that my life was what it was, flaws and all. However, that fleeting moment of happiness was quickly eclipsed by tragedy. As if the universe couldn't bear to see me pleased, it seemed unreal when my dad died. My mother still detested me. And here I was, only 17, inheriting the home we shared. She made it obvious how much she detested me, since she couldn't accept that my dad had given me the house after the will reading was finished. She yelled at me for hours, claiming that I had manipulated my dad throughout the years and that she was the true owner. Then she modified her strategy. She began attempting to persuade me to put her name on the house's deed. Fortunately, my grandparents defended me. They ensured that I couldn't be influenced by my mother, since she was never a decent wife to my dad when he was living. They made it apparent to her that she didn't deserve his house simply because he was dead if she attempted to compel me to alter the deed, even to take her to court. My mother became enraged and to leave me. She claimed that because I was self-centered enough to refuse her the house, she intended to prove to me that I couldn't live without her. She seemed to be trying to convince me that I couldn't support myself, as if losing her would also make me realize how much I depended on her. My paternal grandparents refused to give up. They promised to take care of me in the event that my mother left. In contrast to her, they promised to support me through anything, not only until I was 18 but for the rest of my life. My mom followed through on her threat and left within 2 or 3 weeks after my dad's death. My dad had loved and collected comic books for years, but my mom threw out his whole collection before she left the house. It was her last act of retaliation. It is obvious that she did it out of spite in some perverse manner, to harm me, to destroy him, and to hold me accountable for any resentment she may have had inside when I was nothing. She said I would come crawling back to her in a few years, at a time when I was already feeling totally lost. Her words were poisonous and intended to tear me apart even more. She left me as though I had no significance to her. It was hard for me to comprehend that she could leave so simply so soon after my father's passing. I felt as though I had lost both of my parents in a matter of weeks, and the burden was unbearable as promised. My paternal grandparents moved in with me. They made every effort to give me support and stability during this period. My grandparents were calm, loving people who understood how much I was in pain. They set aside their own suffering to support me, despite the fact that they were also hurting. I was simply trying to get by day by day. In the meanwhile, my mom's desertion made me feel even more alone, and I was already grieving over the loss of my father. I was unable to completely comprehend what was going on around me, as if I were living in a fog. I made myself get out of bed and get dressed and go to school every day. I knew I needed to complete my education in order to be someone in my life, even though I wanted to shut down entirely when I was still in high school. I couldn't get my mother's words out of my head. Without her I would be nothing. I vowed to myself that I would work hard and make sure I succeeded for the rest of my life. My maternal grandparents also made it a point to see me often during this very trying period in my life. They were incensed that their daughter had left me after my dad's death, and were just as astonished and horrified by my mom's behavior as I was. They actually bore a great deal of responsibility for it. I've put a lot of effort into creating a life for myself over the last 5 years. I persevered through it all, graduating from college last year with honors, laude, and landing a fantastic career in information technology. Being able to work remotely has made the position an incredible opportunity. Given everything I've been through, this flexibility has allowed me to travel the world while still working, which feels like a dream come true. I never imagined that I would be here leading a life that seemed so full of possibilities, but I managed to get through those difficult times. Somehow the house my dad left me has been a blessing in more ways than I can list, and I still reside there. I was able to save a substantial sum of money that I would have otherwise spent on rent. In addition to having stability during my time in college, I was able to graduate from college debt-free thanks to the money my father gave me and some assistance from my paternal grandparents. Since starting my career, I've been gradually making the house more uniquely mine by remodeling each room. Every improvement I make to the house makes me feel as if I'm taking back and personalizing the space that has so many memories, both happy and sad. Even though they have now returned to their own house, my paternal grandparents still frequently visit me. We still have a close relationship, and I try to see them as much as I can. They were there for me when I needed them most, and for that I will always be thankful. In all these years, my mother had never once gotten in touch with me. I did get tidbits of information from cousins on her side of the family, and based on what I've heard, she has never felt bad about leaving me. Additionally, rumors told me that she remarried and is currently leading an opulent life with her new spouse. She finally got what she had always desired. I guess a life without obligations and according to her own rules. My mother unexpectedly contacted me last week for the first time in 5 years. She began by sending an email. She most likely obtained my email address from someone else, or from my LinkedIn profile. She mentioned in the email that she had missed connecting with me over the years and that she wanted to communicate. Felt nothing when I read her name in my email. No sadness, no desire, no rage. I definitely would have been desperate for her attention, clamoring for her approval and seizing the opportunity to get back in touch. If this had occurred 5 years prior, I would have done anything to win her love back then. Now, though, it was like reading a stranger's email. I was not moved by anything she said. I decided not to respond since, if nothing else, I was annoyed by her message. Then she started phoning me all the time. She may have gotten my number from one of my cousins, but I'm not sure how. I received multiple voicemails from her. She expressed in each one how much she would want to meet and get back in touch. I disregarded each and every one. I didn't need her to pull me back to that dark place after years of mending and moving on my own. Then she texted me for a long time last week. This one was unique. She expressed her sincere guilt for what she had done and her want to simply meet and offer her apology. She said she wanted to make amends with me after giving it some serious thought over the last few years. If I claimed that after reading that message I wasn't a little intrigued, I would be lying. She had never taken responsibility for her acts before, but now she appeared to be doing so for the first time. I wondered what had led to this abrupt change of heart, but I wasn't prepared to forgive her. Was she truly sorry? Was she serious, or was this just another self-serving ruse to make herself feel less guilty? I answered when she called again. I wanted to know what she truly wanted because her insistence was beginning to irritate me. After responding, I asked her directly what she wanted from me. I instructed my mother to talk rapidly and made it plain that I would block her and finish the conversation within the next 5 minutes if she didn't have anything important to say. She frantically begged me not to interrupt her right away. She said, "I missed you, and now that I'm older, I hate myself for everything I did to her." Voice trembling, she repeatedly apologized, telling me that she had finally come to the realization of the seriousness of her acts, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. She continued by saying that while it was clear that she understood if I didn't want a relationship with her, true desire was simply to meet with me. I wanted to explain why I did what I did all those years ago. She stated as though there was some rationale for leaving me out of the question. I couldn't resist laughing. She had given me enough justifications to last a lifetime. I informed her that I didn't need any closure from her because I had already come to terms with the situation as I didn't care, so I didn't need to know why she did it. However, she insisted that I at least join her for supper. She assured me that she would never disturb me again if I didn't agree with her and that I could block her or go. She was so desperate it was almost disturbing. I wasn't comfortable with it. There was a strange feeling. Why now? Why was she now so keen to make amends? After being silent for 5 years now, the same woman who had cursed me and said I would be nothing had reappeared, pleading for one opportunity to give an explanation. I couldn't get rid of the thought that this abrupt change of heart was about something else entirely. Looked too premeditated, too abrupt, as though she had a secret agenda. I smelled something fishy, but I couldn't identify it. I chose to comply even though it was against my better judgment. I simply wanted to find out the true purpose of this. I reluctantly consented to join her and her new spouse for supper. The meal was held at my mother's new home, and I could tell right away that she was leading a very different life. The home was extremely opulent with pricey artwork, sumptuous furniture, and sophisticated accents all over Bill. Her new spouse appeared sufficiently amiable and kind. We engaged in small talk after his kind introduction, but the entire situation felt uneasy, as if there were enormous unsaid tensions between us. As I walked past the bedrooms during dinner to use the restroom, I couldn't help but notice them. They seemed like they were from a luxury catalog because of how exquisitely designed they were. The pictures that lined the walls attracted my attention even more. Images of my mother and Bill grinning together while visiting far-flung places across the globe. They appeared content and relaxed. I was saddened to see that she never acted that way toward my dad and me. Her smile with us was unlike anything I had ever seen. I was taken aback by the contrast that evoked emotions I had previously suppressed. I heard Bill and my mother conversing in low tones as I was making my way back from the restroom. Since they hadn't noticed me approaching, I stopped and tried to listen to what they had to say. Out of curiosity, my mother was telling Bill how much she detested seeing me and how much I reminded her of my father. At that point, I felt sick to my stomach. Despite Bill's attempts to comfort her, she persisted in moaning that she wished she could skip the entire supper. I took out my phone on a whim and began to record. I have no idea why, although it might have been a reflex, as if I needed evidence of her true. Perhaps I hoped to see it later so I could completely comprehend what was going on. In any case, I made a record. I overheard my mother tell Bill that she would never have gotten in touch with me if it weren't for her folks' insistence that she get back in touch. She continued by saying that she detested her parents for pressuring her to take this action, and that as a result of their circumstances she was merely going through the motions to ensure her inheritance from them. Everything made sense when she said those words, and explained that this dinner and the entire act were really a means to an end for her now. Everything made clear. My mother hadn't become morally upright overnight. She hadn't given it much thought, and she most definitely didn't feel bad about leaving me all along. My intuition had been correct. For a minute I stood motionless, my heart pounding. Her statement that she didn't want to be doing this and that she detested being around me struck a deeper chord than I had anticipated. Even though I had a sneaking suspicion something wasn't right, she remained the same self-centered individual who only thought about herself after all these years and everything. After turning off the recorder I left. She fell silent as soon as she spotted me. I silently thanked Bill for supper and made my way out the door, ignoring my mother's persistent calls, wondering why I was going so suddenly. She later messaged me to say that I had embarrassed her in front of her husband and that I should just be more honest with her because she is my mother. After all, I haven't texted her back because I'm so mad at her after hearing my mother talk about it. Is I wrong to have left the table in the middle of dinner? First update. I want to make it clear that I have always accepted my mother for who she is, which is why I didn't go straight to her in her home after hearing what I did. To be honest, I wasn't overly surprised by it. Was correct to suspect that she had a hidden agenda from the beginning. In fact, I'm happy I got to meet her and have that tape. Tomorrow I'm going to confront my maternal grandparents about it and find out the truth. Second update. I told my maternal grandparents everything when we met. They initially expressed a happy surprise at my mother's desire to get back in touch with me. However, their faces immediately changed when I played the tape of her telling Bill that the inheritance was her only motivation. While my grandmother apologized to me, my grandfather appeared enraged. She admitted that they had been talking about their inheritance lately and that 2 months prior they had told my mother that they were too disappointed in her for leaving me, therefore they didn't want to leave her anything. Rather, their older children would receive the bequest after my mother pleaded with them to change their minds. My grandfather informed her that she may be named in the will if she got back in touch with me. She had chosen to contact me out of desperation. My grandfather apologized awkwardly and said he felt it was a wonderful idea at the time, but I shook my head. After all these years, merely self-centered, and that he and my grandma should have known better. Fortunately, I saw her right away and wasn't duped. Rather than giving my mother her portion of the fortune, my grandfather vowed to give it to me instead of the third update. Not even a day after I spoke with my maternal grandparents, my mother called and yelled at me. I knew this was my opportunity to exact revenge on her and let everything out, so I hadn't intentionally blocked her, she said. I should have spoken to her first and screamed at me for letting her see her parents. To destroy my life, and said I had no right to confront Grandpa. Her remarks made me chuckle. uncontrollably, and I forcefully informed her that I was no longer the child she had mistreated and left behind all those years prior. I inquired as to if her husband was fully aware of the type of woman she was, or if I ought to give him a list of all the things she had done to me over the years that she became quiet. I assured her that I would not think twice about publicly exposing her to all of our relatives and cousins if needed, and that I still had the video from the dinner where she admitted her true motivation. She changed her mind, and insisted that because she gave birth to me I should at least respect her as a parent and not her. After months of pain I sneered and told her that she had chosen to endure that, and that she couldn't continue to blame me for it. After all these years, I said she had to leave my life as soon as possible because I was tired of her machinations. If not, I wouldn't think twice about ruining her life by telling everyone the truth. Since then I have blocked her and I doubt she would ever attempt to get in touch with me.